The morning I found the permit board rewritten in a handwriting that wasn't mine and wasn't anyone's on staff, I understood that whatever had been using Trail 7 had stopped pretending to be weather. Let me back up. Not far. Just enough. My name is Marin. I've been part of the seasonal rotation at Caldwell Gorge Provincial Wilderness for 4 years. It's not a national park. It's not famous. It sits in a long granite seam between two counties in northern Ontario that nobody drives through on purpose, and the nearest town, Harrop, has about 1,100 people, a gas station with a restaurant inside it, and a hardware store that also sells fishing licenses. Caldwell Gorge gets maybe 9,000 visitors a year, mostly in summer, and by October it's essentially mine. I'm one of 3 rangers who cover winter operations. We rotate in 2-week shifts. 1 ranger on, 2 off. You stay at the station, you maintain the trails, you check in with Harrop Dispatch twice a day, and you sit with yourself in a way that most people never have to. I loved it, honestly. That's important. I'm not someone who was already afraid. The trail system at Caldwell is old. Not historic marker old, the kind of old that means the paths were there before the Parks Department was, before the survey maps, before the logging roads. 7 marked trails loop out from the main staging area. Most are under 10 kilometers. Trail 7 is the longest, cutting northeast along the gorge rim for almost 19 kilometers before it drops into a creek drainage and hooks back south. It's classified as difficult. Steep sections, no cell coverage after the first bluff, and a section near kilometer 12 where the trail runs along a ledge, maybe a meter wide, with a 40-meter drop on one side. In summer, it's busy enough. In winter, almost nobody hikes it. I've gone entire 2-week rotations in January without seeing a single boot print past the trailhead. But Trail 7 has been closed more than any other trail in the system's history, and the reasons, when I started looking, didn't hold together. I didn't start looking because I was suspicious. I started looking because of a filing error. January of last year, my 3rd winter, I was organizing the Closure Archive, a binder of carbon copy forms going back to the early 80s because the regional office wanted everything digitized. The task was exactly as boring as it sounds. Each form has a trail number, a closure date, a reopening date, a reason code, and a ranger's signature. Reason codes are simple: weather, maintenance, wildlife activity, hazard, or other. Most closures are weather. A few are hazard rockfall, deadfall across the path, that kind of thing. Wildlife means a denning bear or an aggressive moose, someone reported. Trail 7 had been closed 41 times in 38 years. That's not unusual on its own. It's the most exposed trail, the most remote, the most likely to get dangerous ice. But when I started entering the data, a pattern showed up that you'd never see flipping through the binder 1 page at a time. 26 of those 41 closures happened in October. Not late October, when early snow is normal. Not spread across the month, clustered. Between October 9th and October 22nd, across 38 years, Trail 7 had been closed 26 times. The reason code on every single one was weather. I checked the weather records. This was easy. Environment Canada keeps historical data online. In 11 of those 26 closures, there was no notable weather event on the closure date. No heavy rain, no wind advisory, no early snow, no ice warning, nothing. Clear skies and seasonal temperatures. One closure, in 2003, happened on a day, the regional forecast called sunny, with a high of 14 Celsius. I assumed it was sloppy paperwork, rangers using weather as a default code when they couldn't be bothered to write the real reason. It happens. I've done it myself. For a minor deadfall, you write hazard when you should write maintenance, because the form is annoying and nobody checks. But the signatures bothered me. 7 different rangers signed those 26 October closures across 38 years. That's not one lazy ranger with a rubber stamp. That's the majority of people who've ever held this position making the same decision in the same 2-week window. I brought it up with Gavin. Gavin Tremblay is the senior year-round ranger for Caldwell and the closest thing we have to institutional memory. He's been with the park for 22 years, lives in Harrop, and has the kind of patience that makes you think he's either deeply wise or profoundly checked out. I mentioned the October pattern over the radio during a routine check-in. He was quiet for about 4 seconds, which is a long time on a radio, and then said, "Marin, that trail gets bad ice early. The gorge rim catches shade." Gavin, I'm looking at the weather data. Half these closures were on clear days. Weather codes cover anticipated conditions. If the overnight is going below 0, we close preemptively. In 2003, the overnight low was 8 degrees. Another pause. I'll look into it. Finish the digitizing. Don't editorialize in the spreadsheet. He didn't bring it up again, and neither did I, because winter went on and the binder went back on the shelf and I had actual work to do. But I saved the spreadsheet, and I kept a copy of every form I'd scanned, organized by date. That was January. By April, I'd stopped thinking about it. By July, I was deep in summer operations, visitor management, trail repair, the exhausting cheerfulness required when you're the public face of a place people think belongs to them because they paid a parking fee. By September, the crowds thinned. By the first week of October, I was alone at the station again for my fall rotation. October 6th, a Tuesday. Clear, cold, beautiful. I hiked Trail 7 end to end for a condition assessment. This is standard. Before the weather turns, we walk every trail, note hazards, update the log. I carried a clipboard, a radio, and a GPS unit that I clipped to my pack strap because the satellite coverage is better with line of sight. 19 kilometers is a full day when you're stopping to check drainage culverts and test footbridge anchors, so I started at 6:30. The first 11 kilometers were fine, normal. The birch had turned gold, and the tamaracks were starting to go amber, and the gorge below the rim trail was that blue-black it gets when the water's cold and the light comes in low. I noted 2 sections where erosion had narrowed the tread, flagged a dead spruce leaning over the trail near kilometer 8, and ate lunch on the ledge at 12, looking out over the drainage. It was at kilometer 14 that I found the first thing I couldn't explain. The trail crosses a seasonal creek there, usually dry by October, running through a shallow cut in the granite. There's no bridge, just a step across where the creek is maybe a meter wide. The creek was dry, as expected, but on the far side, arranged on the flat rock shelf where the trail resumes, there were 13 stones. Not a cairn, not a natural scatter. 13 stones, each about the size of a fist, arranged in a straight line perpendicular to the trail, evenly spaced, maybe 20 centimeters apart. The line ran from the trail's left edge to just past its right edge, so that to continue on the path, you had to step over or between them. I stared at them for a while. Hikers do strange things sometimes, build cairns where they shouldn't, leave arrangements they think are artistic, but these stones weren't local. The granite at that crossing is gray-pink, coarse-grained Precambrian shield rock. These 13 stones were dark, almost black, fine-grained, and when I picked one up, it was heavier than it should have been, dense in a way that felt wrong in my hand. Not unnatural exactly, but unexpected. Like picking up a piece of fruit and finding it weighs as much as a brick. I logged it on my clipboard, KM 14.2 stone arrangement across trail. Non-local material. Possible visitor activity. Cleared. I moved the stones off the trail and kept walking. At kilometer 16, I found the tree. A mature white birch. Standing dead, no bark remaining, bone pale. That's not unusual, standing dead birch are everywhere up there. What was unusual was the mark on it. About 2 meters up the trunk, something had carved or worn or burned a smooth, shallow depression into the wood, roughly oval, maybe 30 centimeters tall, 20 wide. The surface inside the depression was darker than the surrounding wood, almost gray and completely smooth. Not axe-cut smooth, not knife-carved smooth. Smooth the way a river stone is smooth, as though the wood had been rubbed by 10,000 patient repetitions of the same motion. I touched it. The wood was warm. Not sun-warm, the tree was in full shade. Warm the way skin is warm. I pulled my hand back and stood there for probably 30 seconds, feeling the particular kind of foolishness that comes from being scared of a tree. I noted it on the clipboard. KM 16.1. Unusual wear mark. On standing dead birch. Possibly wildlife rubbing. Monitor. I took a photo with the station's digital camera. In the photo, which I still have, the depression just looks like a shadow. You can't see the smoothness. You can't feel the warmth. I finished the trail assessment and hiked back to the station. 18-hour day. I was tired enough to eat, standing up, and fall asleep reading. The next morning, October 7th, I wrote up my report and emailed it to Gavin in the regional office. I mentioned the stones and the tree mark as minor curiosities. No one responded to either item. I spent the day on maintenance, splitting firewood, patching a window screen, cleaning the composting toilet. Normal work. October 8th, I hiked Trail 3 for its assessment. Nothing unusual. October 9th, Trail 5. Also, nothing. October 9th. The date landed in my head while I was brushing my teeth that night. October 9th through the 22nd. The window. The 26 closures. I was inside it. I pulled up my spreadsheet on the station laptop. The first October closure in the record was 1,986. Reason, weather. Signed by a ranger named D. Owlett. The most recent was 2022, signed by Gavin. I hadn't been on rotation during the October window. Before, my shifts had always fallen in late October or November. I'd never been the ranger on the ground during those 2 weeks. I radioed Gavin the next morning during the scheduled check-in. Kept it casual. Hey, any reason I should close anything preemptively this rotation? Weather looks stable through the 15th at least. Everything's fine, Marin. Keep the trails open. Even 7? Brief silence. Why would you close 7? Just asking. Keep it open, do your assessments, run your rotation, enjoy the quiet. That was the end of the conversation. But his voice had changed on the second silence tightened in a way I'd heard from him only once before, when a hiker had gone missing for 36 hours near the gorge, and we didn't know yet whether we were running a search or a recovery. A voice carrying weight it wasn't putting into words. I decided to hike Trail 7 again on October 10th. Not a full assessment, just a walk to kilometer 14 to check whether the stones were back. They were. Same spot, same arrangement. 13 dark stones, perpendicular to the trail, evenly spaced. I had moved them off the trail 4 days earlier, tossing them into the brush on the downhill side of the crossing. These were in the exact same configuration, same spacing, same line. Same stones. I recognized a triangular one near the left end and an oblong one near the center. I'd handled each of them. I knew their shapes. Something had collected them from where I'd scattered them across a 10-meter arc of brush, carried them back to the trail, and replaced them in the exact arrangement they'd been in before. I didn't clear them this time. I stood on the near side of the crossing and looked at the line of stones and felt the forest change its texture around me. Not a sound change, not a temperature change, a quality of attention change. Like the difference between being in a room alone and being in a room where someone is standing behind a door. I photographed the stones from multiple angles. I measured the spacing with my tape. 19 centimeters, consistent within a centimeter for all 12 gaps. I weighed one on the spring scale I use for bare hang calibration. 1.4 kilograms, which is roughly double what a granite stone of the same size would weigh. Then I kept walking, past the stones, up the trail toward kilometer 16. I wanted to see the tree again. The depression in the birch trunk had changed. It was deeper. Not by a lot, maybe a centimeter deeper than 4 days ago. But the edges were crisper, the oval more defined, and the smooth, dark surface inside was darker still, almost the color of wet slate. I touched it again. Warm, warmer than before. And this time, when I pressed my palm flat against it, I felt something I have no good language for. A vibration, but not mechanical, not a hum. More like the sensation of pressing your hand against a window when someone is pressing from the other side. Counter-pressure, gentle, sustained, and deliberately responsive to the pressure I was applying. I removed my hand. The sensation stopped. I pressed again. It resumed. I pressed harder. The counter-pressure increased to match, not pushing me away, meeting me. I backed up 3 steps and stood on the trail and looked at the tree, standing dead white birch, bare, pale, unremarkable except for the depression. No wind, no sound. The forest around me was silent in the way forests are sometimes silent, not empty, but held, like the moment between a breath in and a breath out. I walked back to the station. I did not run. I am careful about that distinction because it matters to me. I was afraid, yes, but I was also operational. I was a ranger in my park, and I had a trail to manage, and I did not run. At the station, I opened the archive binder again. I wasn't looking at the closure forms this time. I was looking at the daily logs, the handwritten journals each ranger keeps during their rotation. I'd never read the October entries closely before. Now I did. Most were mundane. Weather, trail conditions, visitor counts. But in 7 different years, in 7 different handwritings, I found variations of the same note. I'll give you the exact quotes. 1,991. Ranger K. Boulier, KM. 14 stones rearranged again despite clearing, leaving in place. 1,998. Ranger F. Okafor. Marker on dead birch at KM 16 appears to have grown since last week. Unsure how to log this. Noting here only. 2004. Ranger S. Delisle. 3rd day of finding new arrangements at the creek crossing. I'm not clearing them anymore. Something replaces them within 24 hours, and I don't want to see what. 2009. Ranger Gavin Tremblay. Oct 14. Closed trail 7. Reason. Weather. Actual reason. I can't explain what I saw at KM 16, and I'm not sending anyone else up there until it stops. That one hit me. Gavin. 2009. He'd closed the trail and lied on the form. And then, when I'd asked him about the pattern, he'd deflected. He knew. He'd always known. 2014. Ranger M. Roy. Sound from the gorge tonight. Not water, not wind, not animal. Like a voice, practicing a word it hasn't learned yet. Closing 7 tomorrow. 2017. Ranger A. Chaudhry. The depression in the birch at 16 now has a second one, forming approximately 2 meters higher on the same trunk. Spacing and shape are consistent. If these are what I think they are, the scale is wrong. Closing trail. Requesting early rotation end. Request denied. 2021, Ranger P. Nguyen. Oct. 11. Permit board text changed overnight. I did not change it. Replacing board. Closing 7. That last entry. The permit board. I hadn't gotten there yet in my own experience, but reading it gave me the sensation of looking at a map of somewhere you're about to go and seeing, very small, at the edge of the mapped area, the words times do not enter. October 11th. The next morning, I walked out of the station at 7:15 to check the trailhead kiosk, the way I do every morning. The kiosk has a large wooden board behind plexiglass where we post trail conditions, closures, and permit requirements. I'd updated it on October 6th when I arrived. Standard text, printed from a template, pinned under the plexiglass with thumbtacks. The text was different. Not replaced, altered. The same sheet of paper I'd pinned up, the same printer font, the same layout. But 3 lines had been added at the bottom, in a handwriting that was neat, small, and used a ink color, a deep reddish brown that I did not have at the station. The 3 lines read, Trail 7 is open. Trail 7 has always been open. Thank you for keeping Trail 7 open. I stood in front of the board in the early morning cold and read those 3 lines 4 times. Then I unlocked the plexiglass, removed the sheet, and held it up to the light. The added text was not printed. It was handwritten, directly on the paper, in ink that had soaked into the fiber, not placed on top, absorbed, as if the paper had grown the words from inside itself. I replaced the sheet with a new one. I put the altered sheet in a Ziploc bag and locked it in the station filing cabinet. I radioed Gavin. Gavin, I need to talk about Trail 7. Go ahead. The permit board was altered overnight. Someone added text. Handwritten. The station was locked. No one has been here. Silence. Then, what did it say? It said Trail 7 is open. Has always been open. And thank you for keeping it open. Silence. A long one. Marin, close the trail. What? Reason code. Weather. Gavin, the sky is perfectly clear. Weather, Marin. Close it, post the sign, and don't hike past kilometer 12 until I get there. I'm coming up tomorrow. He drove up the next morning, October 12th. 3.5 hours from Harrop in his personal truck because the Parks Department vehicle was in for maintenance. He arrived at 10:30, walked into the station, sat down at the table, and didn't speak for a full minute. Then he asked to see the altered sheet. I showed him. He held it at an angle, turned it over, held it up to the window. His face did something complicated, a sequence of expressions that resolved into a kind of grim, resigned calm I associate with people receiving expected bad news. This is the 3rd time I've seen this, he said. 3rd time for you? 3rd time in the system. Nguyen had one in 21. Chaudhry reported something similar in 17, but the paper wasn't preserved. And mine in 09. He set the sheet down. I didn't keep mine. I burned it. I wish I hadn't. Having the physical evidence matters. Evidence of what? He didn't answer that directly. Instead, he told me about October of 2009. Gavin had been on rotation, same as me solo, fall shift, quiet park. He'd noticed the stones at kilometer 14, same arrangement, same dark heavy stones, same creek crossing. He'd cleared them twice, and they'd returned twice. On his 3rd visit, he continued to kilometer 16 and found the depression in the birch. At that time, 15 years ago, It was shallower, he estimated, maybe a centimeter deep, where by the time I'd seen it, it was closer to 3. He'd touched it and felt the warmth and the counter pressure. But then he'd done something I hadn't done. He'd stayed past dark. Not on purpose. He'd twisted his ankle on the descent from the ledge at kilometer 12, and by the time he'd limped past the birch tree at 16, it was after 6 and the light was going. He decided to push through rather than make camp, but his pace was slow, and by 7:15 it was fully dark, and he was still at kilometer 17, 2 kilometers from the trailhead. He turned on his headlamp. He walked. At kilometer 17.5, his headlamp caught something off the trail to the right. Movement, but not animal movement, not the quick flinch of eyes or the fluid shift of a body in brush. A slow, deliberate, vertical motion, like something standing up. He stopped. He pointed his headlamp directly at it. 20 meters off the trail, in a gap between 2 spruces, there was a shape. Gavin described it carefully, and I want to be careful repeating it because I think precision matters here. It was tall, he estimated, over 2 meters, maybe 2.5. It was narrow, roughly the width of a human torso, but longer, stretched, with proportions that didn't resolve into anything identifiable. It was dark, not black, but the dark brownish gray of the heavy stones at kilometer 14. It had no features he could make out, no face, no limbs, no texture. Just a tall, narrow, vertical form, slightly swaying, the way a person sways when they're standing still and trying to stay balanced. But here's what got him. His headlamp was a good one, 100 lumen lead, and at 20 meters in clear air, it should have illuminated the object fully. It didn't. The light reached the shape and stopped, not reflected, not absorbed, stopped, like the shape was a hole cut in the light's ability to travel. Everything behind and around it was lit normally. The shape itself remained exactly as dark as it had been before the light touched it. Gavin and the shape looked at each other, he used that phrase, looked at each other, despite acknowledging it had no visible eyes for approximately 10 seconds. Then it moved. Not toward him. Not away. It tilted. The whole vertical form tilted about 15 degrees to the left, slowly, like a tree beginning to fall. And then it righted itself, and tilted again. Right, left, right. It was learning something, Gavin told me. That's what it felt like. It was testing emotion, practicing. He left. He did not walk, he admits. He ran, bad ankle and all, for the last 2 kilometers. He reached the trailhead, drove to the station, closed the trail, and wrote times, weather times, on the form. In the morning, the permit board had the writing on it. I tore it off and burned it, he said. I closed 7 for 14 days. When I reopened it at the end of October, everything was gone. Stones, tree mark, all of it. The depression on the birch had healed over, like bark growing back, but in a matter of days. And you didn't report it. To whom? He said it without bitterness. A simple question. What's the form for this, Marin? What's the reason code? I wrote weather, because weather is a thing the system understands. This isn't. I asked the obvious question. What is it? Gavin leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. I've spent 15 years not answering that. I've read the old logs. I've talked to 2 of the retired rangers who wrote those entries. Beaulieu, who's in a home in Sault Ste. Marie now, told me she saw the shape 3 times in October 91, always at dusk, always near the gorge rim between kilometer 15 and 17. She said it was smaller then, shorter, thinner. She said it didn't sway. He leaned forward. It's growing, Marin. Whatever it is, it's been present in this trail system for at least 40 years. It manifests every October in the same 2-week window, and it's physically larger and more behaviorally complex every time. The stones weren't in the record before 89. The tree mark wasn't noted before 95. The writing on the board didn't start until 09. Each behavior is new. Each one is more. He searched for the word, more specific, more directed, more like it's trying to say something. The writing times is times saying something. It's saying keep the trail open. Yes. Why does it want the trail open? I don't know. Maybe it wants to be visited. Maybe it wants to be seen. Maybe the trail is the only interface it has, and closing it is like, he stopped. I don't know. What happens if we leave it open? I don't know that either. No one's ever tried. Every ranger in the record has closed 7 once they saw enough. It's the one consistent response. You see the stones, you see the tree, you see the writing, you close the trail, you wait it out, it resets. 2 weeks later, it's gone. Until next year. Until next year. A little bigger, a little more. We sat with that. Wind outside, the sound of the flag line tapping the pole. Then I asked, what did Chaudhry see? The 17 entry mentions 2 depressions. Gavin nodded. 2. Same birch, same smooth oval shape, one at 2 meters, one at about 4 meters up the trunk. She measured the spacing and the proportions. She's a biologist, she thinks in anatomy. She told me the spacing and size ratio were consistent with the placement of a face and a hand. If the thing that made them was standing next to the tree and pressing itself against it, at the scale of something about 4 meters tall. The math connected in my head instantly, and I saw from Gavin's expression that he knew it would. The shape he saw in 2009 was 2 to 2.5 meters. By 2017, the impression on the tree suggested something 4 meters tall. By the time I touched the depression in 2024, it was deeper than anything in the record. How big do you think it is now? I asked. I think you should not go find out. He left that afternoon. He told me to keep 7 closed through October 23rd, use the weather code, and radio him every morning and evening. He'd put in a request to extend my rotation overlap with the next ranger so I wouldn't be alone for the last week. He told me to stay off Trail 7 entirely. I said yes. I meant it. I closed the trail. I posted the sign. I stayed at the station for 2 days. On the morning of October 14th, I went out to check the trailhead kiosk, where I'd posted the closure notice for Trail 7. The notice was there, undisturbed, under the plexiglass, exactly as I'd left it. But below it, on the wooden frame of the kiosk, there were marks. Shallow gouges in the wood, not carved, pressed. As if something had gripped the frame with great force and left indentations. 5 of them, evenly spaced along the bottom edge of the board, each about 15 centimeters long, each about 2 centimeters deep. The spacing between them was 22 centimeters. They looked like fingers. They looked like fingers on a hand that was perhaps 4 times the size of mine. I stood there, and I was afraid in a way that was different from the fear on the trail. On the trail, the strangeness was out there, at kilometer 14, at kilometer 16, contained in a space I could leave. This was at the trailhead. This was 100 meters from the station. This was where people park their cars and read the map and decide which trail to take. This was the threshold between the park and the world, and something had come to it in the night and gripped it and left a message that my closure sign was noted. I photographed the marks. I measured them. I radioed Gavin. It's at the kiosk. He was quiet. Then, marks? Like a hand. A very large hand, on the kiosk frame. Are you safe? I think so. It's daylight. Nothing's here now. Marin, I want you to leave. Drive to Harrop. I'll cover the rest of the rotation. I should have said yes. I know that now, with the certainty of someone who has walked past the point where should have matters. But what I said was, I'm staying. If I leave, the trail stays closed with no one here to monitor what's happening. Or it doesn't stay closed. What do you mean? I mean, I closed it. I posted the sign, and something came to the kiosk and put its hand on the board. If I leave, and there's no one here, what happens to the closure? What if it opens the trail itself? Trails don't open themselves. Permit boards don't rewrite themselves either, Gavin. Another silence. He didn't have an answer. Neither did I. But I'd said the thing that was under all of it, the real fear, the one the old logs pointed at but never stated. Every October, this thing asked for the trail to be open. Every October, a ranger closed it. And every October, the thing reset and came back bigger, more capable, more communicative. What was the end game? What happened in the October when it was big enough, or articulate enough, or present enough that the closure sign didn't matter? I stayed. Gavin didn't argue, I think, because he understood the logic even if he hated it. He said he'd come up again on the 16th and to radio him if anything changed. October 14th, daytime. I did something I'd been trained to do, but had never applied in this context. I set up monitoring. I placed the station's 2 wildlife cameras on the kiosk, one facing the permit board, one facing the Trail 7 trailhead, motion activated, infrared capable for night shots. I time-stamped both, checked the batteries, and tested them by walking through the detection zone. Both triggered cleanly. If anything came to the kiosk tonight, I'd have images. I spent the rest of the day at the station. I didn't hike. I did maintenance. I cleaned. I organized. I did the things you do when you need your hands busy because your mind is somewhere you don't want it to be. That night, I slept badly. Not because of noise. The night was silent in the normal way, wind and the occasional creak of the building. But I dreamed about the tree. In the dream, I was pressing my hand against the depression, and the counterpressure was stronger, insistent, and the oval was getting deeper under my palm, sinking into the wood. And I realized I was not pressing into the tree, but the tree was pulling my hand in, slowly, warmly, with a patience that felt like kindness, and I couldn't tell if it wanted to consume my hand or hold it. I woke at 5:40. I dressed and went to the kiosk before dawn. The closure sign for Trail 7 had been removed from under the plexiglass. The plexiglass was still locked, I checked, and my key was the only one that fit the lock, but the sign was gone. In its place was a new sheet of paper that had not been there when I went to sleep. The sheet was blank, except for 4 lines, in the same reddish-brown handwriting as before. Thank you for visiting. The trail is open. You are welcome here. Please continue. I stood in the pre-dawn dark with my headlamp on, reading those words, and what I felt was not terror. That's the hard thing to say. What I felt was something much more dangerous. I felt greeted. I felt seen. I felt, for just a moment, the way you feel when you arrive somewhere and someone you haven't met yet says your name. I locked the new sheet in the filing cabinet with the first one. I checked the wildlife cameras. Camera 1, facing the permit board, had triggered 4 times during the night. The first 3 images showed nothing, black frames, the kiosk faintly visible, no motion source. False triggers, maybe, or something moving through the detection zone that the infrared couldn't image, like Gavin's headlamp, light reaching the shape and stopping. The 4th image was different. I need to describe this carefully. The camera was positioned to capture the full front face of the kiosk from about 3 meters away. The kiosk is roughly 2 meters tall. In the 4th image, time-stamped 3:47 a.m., The right side of the frame was occupied by a vertical form that extended from below the bottom of the image to above the top. It was not fully in frame. The camera's field of view wasn't wide enough to capture it entirely. What was visible was a section of something tall, narrow, and dark, with a surface that the infrared flash had partially illuminated. The illuminated portion showed a texture that looked like stone smooth, fine-grained, the same dark gray-brown as the stones at kilometer 14, but it wasn't uniform. There were variations in the surface, slight ridges and planes that suggested structure, not carved, grown. At the level of the permit board, about 1.5 meters up the kiosk, there was a protrusion from the form's surface that extended toward the plexiglass. It was long, narrow, and tapered, and it was pressed flat against the front of the board. A finger, a single finger, roughly 40 centimeters long, resting on the surface of the locked plexiglass with apparent gentleness. Camera 2, facing the trailhead, had triggered once. Timestamp, 3:47, same second. The image showed the Trail 7 trailhead in infrared, the wooden post with the trail marker, the first 20 meters of path, disappearing into the trees, and on the path, moving away from the camera, a shape, tall, narrow, vertical, but not standing still this time, caught mid-stride in the frozen instant of the infrared flash, and I use the word stride deliberately because the image showed asymmetry, a lean, a shift of mass that was unmistakably locomotive. Whatever it was, it had come to the kiosk, changed the sign, and was walking back up its trail. I sat on the bench outside the station with the camera in my hands, flipping between those two images, and I did something I hadn't done in this park or any other professional context. I cried. Not from fear, from the loneliness of knowing something impossible and being unable to share it through any mechanism the world would accept. Weather. The reason code is always weather. Because there is no code for this. There is no form, no protocol, no institutional language for a thing that comes out of the gorge every October, grows a little taller, learns a little more, and asks, in handwriting it taught itself, for the trail to stay open. I radioed Gavin at 7. I described the images. He drove up that day instead of waiting for the 16th. When he saw the photos, he went pale in a way I wouldn't have thought possible for a man who spent 30 years in the woods. He sat at the table and looked at the image of the finger on the plexiglass for a long time. It wasn't this far down the trail before, he said. In '09, I only ever saw it past kilometer 15. Chaudhry saw it at 14. Nguyen reported sounds at the trailhead but no visual. And now it's here, at the kiosk. It's been coming closer every cycle. Yes, how much closer each time was. He did the math in his head. If the rate is roughly consistent, it's moved about a kilometer closer to the trailhead each cycle, maybe a little more. The trailhead is kilometer 0, so next year it'll be at the parking lot. He didn't respond to that. Gavin, what's past the parking lot? The access road, then the highway, then Harrop. I know the geography, Marin. Then what are we going to do about it? He looked at me with an expression I've thought about many times since. It was not fear, not resignation, not confusion. It was the look of a man who has been managing an impossible situation through the only tool available to him, seasonal denial, and has just been shown that the tool has stopped working. I don't think closing the trail does what we think it does, I said. It's worked for 40 years. Has it? It resets every November. The thing goes dormant or retreats or whatever it does. And then it comes back bigger and closer. Closing the trail doesn't stop it. It just means it doesn't have an audience for 2 weeks. And you think giving it an audience would be better? I think we don't know. Because No one's ever tried. What I was proposing sat between us on the table like the dark stones on the trail. Obvious, heavy, requiring a decision about whether to step over. I want to go up there, I said, at night. Absolutely not. Gavin, it comes to the kiosk. It rewrites the permit board. It poses for the wildlife camera. It walks back up the trail. It's making contact. It's been making contact for 40 years, and every ranger has responded by closing the door. Because that's the safe response. Safe for whom? Us. It hasn't hurt anyone. In 40 years of records, there's no injury, no disappearance, no incident. Hikers don't go missing in October. There aren't any hikers. It writes polite notes. It puts stones back where it wants them. It pressed one finger against the plexiglass like it was touching a window. Does that sound like something we should be hiding from? He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "It also sounds like something we shouldn't be anthropomorphizing." He was right about that, but I was right too, and we both knew it. The closures weren't containment. They were avoidance. And the thing they were avoiding was growing past the point where avoidance was possible. Gavin stayed the night of October 16th. We agreed that I would hike Trail 7 the next morning, daytime, not night, that was his condition, and go to kilometer 14. Just the stones. See if the arrangement had changed. Observe, document, leave. No going past 16. No contact with the birch tree. No staying past 3 p.m. I agreed to his terms. October 17th, 8 a.m. Clear sky. Temperature just above freezing. Light frost on the grass. I hiked Trail 7 with my clipboard, camera, GPS, radio, and a calm that I had manufactured through sheer professional discipline. The trail was different. Not physically, the path was the same, the landmarks were the same, the kilometer markers matched my GPS, but the quality of the forest was different. Starting at about kilometer 6, the silence deepened in stages, not the absence of sound, but the presence of attention. The trees were the same trees, the gorge was the same gorge, but the space between things, between trunks, between the trail and the sky, between one step and the next, felt occupied, populated by a focus that was not mine. At kilometer 12, the ledge, I stopped and ate a granola bar and looked into the gorge. The gorge was the same. The water was the same. But on the far wall of the gorge, on the rock face opposite the trail, I saw something I had never seen in 4 years of hiking this route. Marks. Dozens of them. Smooth, shallow ovals in the granite, the same shape as the depression on the birch at 16. They covered a section of the cliff face roughly 20 meters wide and extended from the waterline to the rim, maybe 50 meters of vertical rock, all the same shape, all the same size, evenly spaced. Like a page covered in the same letter, written over and over in patient repetition. Or like something had been pressing itself against the rock for a very long time, testing surfaces, learning to make shapes that meant something. I photographed them. I radioed Gavin. He didn't respond. I checked the radio battery full, signal strong. I tried again. Nothing. I tried the emergency channel. Static. Not the sharp static of interference, a soft, breathing static that sounded like air moving through a long tube. I kept walking. At kilometer 14, the stones were not in a line. They were in a circle. 13 stones, arranged in a ring about 2 meters in diameter on the flat rock at the creek crossing. And in the center of the circle, placed with the same careful spacing that characterized everything this entity did, was a 14th stone. This stone was not dark. It was pale, almost white, roughly oval, about the size of my fist. And when I crouched at the edge of the circle and looked at it closely, I saw that its surface was covered in tiny marks, scratches, or inscriptions so fine I couldn't read them without a magnifier. They covered every visible face of the stone. Dense, uniform, deliberate. I picked it up. The moment I lifted it from the circle, two things happened simultaneously. The soft radio static stopped. I heard it cut out from the radio on my hip. A sudden, clean silence. And from somewhere above me on the trail, past kilometer 14, past 16, somewhere in the deep timber between the trail and the gorge rim, there was a sound. Not a voice, not a mechanical noise, not wind, a tone, a single, sustained tone, low enough to feel in my sternum, with a quality that was, and I'll use this word, knowing how it sounds musical. Not a note from any instrument I know, but a note in the sense that it had pitch and sustain, and something that functioned like timbre. It was the sound of something large, vibrating at a frequency it had chosen. It lasted about 5 seconds. Then it stopped. I stood in the silence afterward with the white stone in my hand, and I made a decision that broke every agreement I'd made with Gavin, and every protocol I'd been trained on, and every instinct that was screaming at me to walk south. I stepped over the circle. I continued up the trail. Kilometer 15. The marks on the gorge wall were visible from the trail now, covering the opposite cliff face as far as I could see in both directions. Hundreds of ovals, thousands. The granite looked tattooed. Kilometer 16. The birch. It was not the same. The single oval depression I'd seen on October 6th and the deeper version I'd seen on October 10th was gone. In its place, the entire surface of the dead birch, from the root flare to the first branch stub at about 6 meters, was covered in the same smooth, dark, warm material that had lined the depression. The tree had been sheathed, encased. The bark was gone, replaced by a surface that looked like dark polished stone, but had the warmth and faint give of something alive. The tree was the same shape it had always been, but it was no longer made of wood. I touched it. The counter-pressure was immediate, strong, and specific. It didn't just push back. It pushed back in a pattern. Press, release, press, press, release. Like a rhythm, like a chord, like something trying to establish a shared language through the only interface available. I pressed back. Same pattern. Press, release, press, press, release. From inside the tree, from inside the stone-warm sheath that had been a birch, I felt a response that was different. Not counter-pressure, a vibration. The same low tone I'd heard from up the trail, but transmitted through contact, through my palm, through the bones of my hand and wrist. It modulated. It shifted pitch. It did something that I can only describe as inflecting. The tone rose, held, fell, rose again, held longer. It was asking a question. I don't know how I knew that, but the musical contour of the vibration had the unmistakable shape of an interrogative, a rising line that waits. I didn't know how to answer. I pressed my hand flat and held it there, and I said out loud to a tree on a trail in the middle of the Ontario bush, "I don't understand." The vibration changed, simplified, became a single pulse. One, then nothing, then one, then nothing. The most basic possible signal. Binary. Yes, no, on, off. Are you there? Yes, I said, and pressed once. The tree pulsed once in return. I stood there with my hand on the warm surface and my pack on my back and my radio silent and the gorge deep and quiet below me, and I was part of a conversation. The first one, maybe, in the entire history of this pattern. 40 years of notes on permit boards and stones on trails and shapes in the dark and handwritten pleas in an ink the color of old blood, and the thing had been trying to say hello, and every ranger had responded by closing the trail and writing times, weather times, on a form. I stayed for an hour. The communication didn't advance beyond pulses. I'd press a pattern. It would echo it. We'd go back and forth. It felt like two people trying to talk through a wall. The vocabulary was limited to rhythm and pressure, but it was reciprocal. It was responsive. It was not random, and it was not mechanical, and it was not threatening. At 2:45, I lifted my hand from the tree and said, "I have to go. I'll come back." One pulse, strong, then silence. I hiked out. The radio came back at kilometer 6, Gavin's voice, frantic, asking if I was okay, telling me he'd been trying to reach me for 4 hours. I told him I was fine. I told him I was coming back to the station. I didn't tell him what I'd done. When I got to the station, he was standing outside with his arms crossed and the look of a man who has been pacing. I sat him down and told him everything. His reaction was not what I expected. He didn't shout. He didn't tell me I was reckless. He closed his eyes and said, "Buliu told me something when I visited her in 2012. She was in the early stages of dementia by then, and I wasn't sure how much to trust. She said that in 1991, on the last night before she closed the trail, she went to the trailhead at dusk, and she stood at the edge of the parking lot, and she said out loud, 'I'm sorry. I don't know what you want.' And she said the forest answered her. What did it say? She said it didn't use words. She said the trees moved. Not in the wind. There was no wind. The trees along the trailhead, the first 30 or 40 meters of Trail 7, leaned. All of them, together, in the same direction, toward her, and then they straightened and leaned again, like a bow, I said. She said like a nod, like something saying times I see you too. We sat in the station in the falling dark and talked about what to do, and for the first time in the 40-year history of this pattern, 2 rangers agreed to not close the trail. We left it open. October 18th through the 22nd, I hiked to kilometer 16 every day. Gavin came with me twice. Each day, the sheathed birch was slightly different, the surface more complex, the texture developing what looked like grain, like the growth rings of a tree rendered in stone. The communication through touch became more nuanced. By the 20th, the single pulses had developed into longer sequences, rhythmic patterns that repeated with variations, like a language building itself in real time. I recorded them with a portable microphone pressed against the surface, capturing the vibrations as audio. I have 11 hours of recordings. They sound, when played back, like a heartbeat learning to sing. On October 21st, the shape appeared. Gavin and I were at the birch at 3:30 in the afternoon, early dusk in the gorge's shadow. It emerged from the tree line at kilometer 17 the way a person steps out of a room casually, without urgency, as if it had been waiting for us to be ready. It was tall. Gavin's estimate of 2 to 2.5 meters was from 2009. In 2024, it was taller. I'd estimate 4 meters, maybe slightly more. The proportions were the same as he'd described, narrow, vertical, dark stone gray, but it had developed features. Not a face, not limbs in the human sense, but structural differentiations, broader at the top, a slight taper, and along what I'll call its front surface, a series of the same smooth oval depressions that covered the gorge wall and the birch tree. They were arranged vertically, regularly spaced, and as we watched, they pulsed. Not with light, with depth. Each oval deepened and shallowed in sequence, a wave of motion traveling down the body like a breath. It stood on the trail, 30 meters from us, and the ovals pulsed, and the low tone came from it not through the tree this time, but from the shape itself, from the stone body, resonating in the cold air. Gavin grabbed my arm, not to pull me back, to steady himself. It's the same one, he whispered. From '09. I know it's the same one. How? It leaned. When it saw me looking, it leaned right, then left. The same motion. The same. His voice broke. It remembered me. The shape tilted. Right, then left. The same testing, practicing lean that Gavin had described from 15 years ago, but smoother now, more controlled. Less like learning to balance, and more like a greeting, a wave, a recognition of someone it had met before who had run away in the dark. Gavin let go of my arm. He stepped forward, one step. The shape pulsed. All its ovals deepened simultaneously in a single slow wave. "I'm sorry, I ran," Gavin said. The tone shifted, rose, held. The interrogative contour, the question shape. "I don't know what you're asking," he said. It leaned forward, just slightly, the way you lean toward someone when you're trying to hear them, and from its surface, from the dark stone-grey body standing on a trail in the Ontario bush, there was a sound that was not a tone. It was a word, thick, distorted, sourced from a body that had no throat, shaped by a physics I don't understand, but unmistakable. A single word, spoken with the careful imprecision of a first attempt. "Open." Then it straightened. The ovals stilled. The tone faded. And it walked, with the same locomotive asymmetry I'd seen in the wildlife camera image, back up the trail, past kilometer 17, into the trees, and was gone. Gavin and I stood on the trail for 5 minutes without speaking. Then he turned to me and said, "We can't close the trail anymore, Marin." "No, we have to tell someone." "Who?" "The regional office. They'll send a biologist who'll write it up as a bear encounter and close the park for a month." "Then who?" I thought about it. I'm still thinking about it. The thing in the gorge has been trying to communicate for 40 years. It writes on permit boards, arranges stones, presses shapes into rock, sheathes trees in its own substance, learns to lean and pulse and, now, to form a word. One word, chosen from whatever understanding it has of us, delivered with unmistakable intent. Open. Not a command, a request. The same request it had been making on the permit board all along, translated now into sound. Keep the trail open. Keep the way between us passable. Don't close the door. It's November now. October 23rd came and went without a closure, for the first time in the system's history. The shape has not appeared since the 21st. The birch at kilometer 16 still wears its stone sheath. Though the surface has cooled and the counterpressure is faint, the ovals on the gorge wall are still there. The stones at the creek crossing are still in their circle. With the white stone in the center, I've left them undisturbed. Trail 7 is open. I don't know what happens next October. I don't know if the thing in the gorge is dangerous, or benign, or something so far outside those categories that applying them is meaningless. I don't know if the word it spoke was the beginning of a vocabulary or the only one it'll ever need. What I know is this. I'm the first ranger who didn't close the trail. I'm the first one who pressed back when the tree pressed against my hand, and I'm the first one who heard it speak. The official record for October 2024 shows all trails open for the full month. Reason, no adverse conditions reported. The wildlife camera images are in the filing cabinet with the handwritten sheets. The audio recordings are on a USB drive in my desk at home in Harrop. Gavin and I have discussed next steps exactly once since November. He said, "What if it just wanted to be heard?" I didn't have an answer, but I keep thinking about the ovals. Thousands of them, pressed into the granite over decades, maybe centuries. Each one the same shape, the shape of a hand or a face, pressed close to a surface, like someone on the other side of a wall, leaning in, trying to feel whether anyone is leaning back. For 40 years, no one leaned back. I did. Trail 7 is open. It has always been open. You are welcome here. Please continue. Those words aren't mine. They're its. But I'm the one leaving them up, and I think that's the point. The door only works if someone on both sides agrees to keep it that way. My next rotation is April. I don't know what I'll find when the snow melts and the trail clears and I walk back up to kilometer 16. Maybe the birch will be bare wood again. Maybe the gorge will be clean granite. Maybe 40 years of asking was leading to one October where someone finally said yes, and that was enough. Or maybe it'll be at kilometer 12 this time, or 10, or at the parking lot, standing in the dawn frost, waiting, leaning slightly forward, practicing the second word. I don't know whether to hope for that or fear it, but I know the trail will be open. It's the only honest thing I've ever written on that board.